Defund OPD, get OPD out of school.
No justice! No peace!
We're in a moment of empowerment for Black people and for people of color.
This memorial is like a starting idea that we can do more than just protest.
This nation is broken and it's time to make change, and that's why I'm here, and I'm going to keep marching at every protest until it happens.
The fact that there are 50 states and 18 countries that are protesting all for Black lives, it's really amazing to see.
We're all sitting here fighting for equality, and it's an important time that we all come together, especially with the youth.
The black community does not need to change. We need to change.
And change, that is the heart and driving force of this movement. I want to thank you for joining us tonight to continue that discussion, Race in America, the conversation. The last time we met, it was how George Floyd died. That really moved so many people across the nation and world, for that matter, in some type of way, to activate, to do something. Well, 2 weeks later, a similar headline, but this time, a new face, a new name. Rayshard Brooks, an Atlanta police officer, shot and killed him. Tonight, that former officer has surrendered to authorities and facing a murder charge. And the details surrounding Brooks' death really has caused a lot of people to want to have that conversation, talk about race relations, talk about police reform. Well, tonight, we're going to break down that wall. We're going to have that conversation, and it's going to happen tonight. I want to thank you for joining us again. I'm Marcus Washington.
And I'm Jessica Aguirre. Talking about racism is hard, but our vow and our goal here to each other and to you is, again, to be brave, to be vulnerable, to open this conversation, and to both listen and hear. Now, Marcus, you said so much has changed in the last 2 weeks since we were here before talking about this. I guess my question to you is, did you start to feel some sort of a shift in the country and in this conversation? And did that shift again with Brooks' death?
What I think has happened over the last 3-4 weeks, as we're seeing a lot more people take interest in what's going on. A lot of people are wanting, they're really yearning, they're hungry for the knowledge of what they just didn't know. We're seeing a lot of libraries, they're running out of the books talking about race relations, talking about systematic oppression. We're seeing more people saying, you know what, I didn't know. And now I'm going to do my part to understand.
But still, having it happen again right after, does that give you pause to think, oh, God, this is really not going to get fixed, or the road is still too far?
For me, it was shocking. I woke up, I thought about it, and I said, what? Right. Again, But, I think for a lot of people, it's happened so much. And it's not that it's not hurting as much. But it's one of those things where it's like, see. It's kind of like the proof that a lot of people have been talking about for so long. And now it's like, see. You see why we take the knee. You see why we protest. You see why we hurt, why we cry. And I think the fact that people are seeing is really opening the door for a lot of things.
And tonight is really about listening also, so that we can learn and understand.
Really is. It really is. And a lot of this all stemmed from the death of George Floyd. The Black Lives Matter movement really has changed this country. People, especially young people, they're really fighting for better education, health care, and police accountability. And those calls for change, they are loud and clear. Change has never been an easy road.
No justice! No peace!
It's a battle fought inch by inch. In just the last 3 weeks, the cries for change, fueled by the death of George Floyd, have echoed along the roads of this nation and beyond.
Some people know how to pray. Some people know how to paint.
In cities like Oakland, San Francisco, and Richmond, the call is now literally written on those roads.
It's all about capturing the moment that we're in right now.
People have called for justice with shouts and with silence, with raised fists and bent knees. And their cries chanted a new name, Rashard Brooks, who was fatally shot by Atlanta police officers after an altercation.
The trust that we have with the police force is broken.
They've mourned the deaths of Breonna Taylor, Michael Brown, Ahmaud Arbery with tears and art.
Artists have always kind of been the voice of the revolution.
As Floyd laid to rest in Houston, Texas last week,
I just want to say to him, I love you.
Confederate statues came down. NASCAR banned the Confederate flag, and the NFL apologized for failing to listen to players about racism. We've seen police departments soul-searching too, some eliminating chokeholds, beanbag guns, and tear gas.
Are there things that we can work on and improve? Absolutely. Is there better training we can have? Yes.
They are all signs that along that slow road of change, the death of George Floyd is the landmark that brought a movement of new life.
So it is impossible to look at those images and not feel the pain and the discomfort that people across the country are feeling. So many of them are our friends or our family or our children. There's so many emotions. People are so confused. There's uncertainty. There's fear, not understanding what's happening really and how to approach the conversation. So that's part of tonight. We want you to be part of this conversation, and we want to know from you, what do you better want to understand?
Yeah, and really, what questions do you have? We want to bring in Chris Gamore. He has been tracking all of that for us online. And Chris, what are people saying?
Marcus, good evening. Well, so what we're doing is we're streaming on Facebook and YouTube right now, and that's where you can join the conversation. You can share your thoughts or post a question in the comment section just below the video player. Earlier, our social team posted about tonight's special, and even that pre-show message has generated some reactions. Look at one from Honor right here, who says, first, we should focus on income inequality. Sophia says she sees systemic inequality in everything, for sure. And friend Timbo, he writes and says, I see so many ignorant comments online. People need to learn about systemic racism. Join Honor, Sophia, and Fred. Please share your thoughts on Facebook or YouTube right now. There are the addresses right there. Jessica, I understand you received a question by email, right?
Yeah, I did. And Marcus, I wanted to bring this up to you because it was right after we did the last show. I got an email from a viewer who was commending the honesty and the rawness that we had in that show. But then she said she had a question, and it's, I think, a question that's a flashpoint that a lot of white people want to ask, and sometimes they're afraid to ask. She wasn't being flippant. Her question was, why is it wrong to say all lives matter, not just Black lives matter? It was a sincere question, and I think that sometimes it's a flashpoint. What is wrong with that?
Right. So that's one of the ones, I can explain it. So the thing about it, let's first start by saying that there was never a situation where people said only Black lives matter. So we want to be clear with that. We do think that all lives matter. But take this, for instance. Imagine, Jessica, you know, you have daughters. Just imagine one of your daughters. They fall. They hit their head. Nervous that she could have a brain injury, anything like that. You rush her to the hospital. You get inside, and they see the blood, and it looks bad. And then you see there's another mother sitting in the hospital, and she says, wait. My daughter sprung her ankle. Why do you get to go first? And then another mother jumps up and said, no, wait. Well, my child has been sick throughout the night. They were throwing up. I don't know what's wrong. Why is your daughter more important to go now? All of our kids, they matter. All of our kids are sick. But your kid is the one that's bleeding, that could possibly have a brain injury, could possibly be dying at that moment.
So it has to do with the extent of the communal wound.
It is.
Of the Black community.
It is, because when you think about it, right now, Black lives are the ones unproportionately being attacked, killed at the hands of police.
Okay.
We're seeing it more and more. George Floyd, Freddie Gray, Wilson John. I mean, the names we can say again and again. And so when that happens, and I understand there are Latino lives that are taken, there are Asian lives, that is true. But when you think about the makeup and the number of Black people compared to white people, we're outnumbered. But yet, we're still being targeted more by police. We're still being killed more by police. We're incarcerated at a higher rate than our white counterparts.
Okay.
Why is that? Why are we being targeted? So when you say all lives matter, it's not that we don't think that all lives matter, but it sounds and what it feels like is you're ignoring the fact that my life is in danger and it's hurting. So that's why.
That's a painful thing to hear.
It brings a little pain when you say that. It's as if you are ignoring the pain that we're feeling right now.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for explaining that.
Absolutely. All right. Well, you know what? So what should a person say? What should a person say, a white person, if they want to know how to start that conversation? How can they be a part of this movement, be a force in this movement, and not sound ignorant? Well, joining me is comedian and activist W. Kamau Bell. He's a passionate and very vocal voice with these recent conversations around race. I want to thank you so much for joining us, W. Kamau.
Thanks for having me.
I want to start out with that question because I know a lot of people have that. How do I start this conversation? Because I don't want to sound racist. I don't want to sound ignorant, but I want to have this conversation. So how does that happen?
I mean, I think people who ask that question are forgetting that we are at the time of the most information available to you in the history of planet Earth, and there's more information available every day. So I think you first don't start the conversation with somebody else. You start it with yourself. There are many books that you can read out there. There's many YouTube videos. There's many ways to start doing the research on your own so that if you have a chance to have the conversation, you already have read into the text and you already have some sense of what's going on. So I think a lot of times people want to know, how do I start it with the black person next to me at work? And I would say that person already has a job and that person already is going through their own experiences with what's going on in the world. Start the conversation with yourself and then other white people around you.
Yeah, I heard someone was saying that, don't expect to come to me and get a full history lesson and know everything within a matter of our conversation. This has to be, you have to do work before the conversation and work after the conversation.
Yes, and there's many books, White Fragility, So You Want to Talk About Race by my friend Ijoma Oluwo. There's many books out there about race and white people learning how to talk about them. I find the autobiography of Malcolm X to be a great starter for a lot of people. So don't look outside yourself, look at yourself and look inward first.
And would you say it should be a situation where you don't feel, or you shouldn't be afraid of making a mistake because what you were taught or what you thought you knew is all wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many times in life we understand that we have to make mistakes to get better at things. I mean, if you've ever, started working out, or if you learned how to ride a bicycle, or if you want to become a better cook, you understand that you're going to burn some things as you become a better cook. You might even burn yourself.
Right.
But if you want to become a good cook, you keep trying. But somehow with race, the minute a white person gets burned, oftentimes they go, whoops, that was the wrong thing to do. I'll never talk about it again, which is why we're still in the same position we're in.
Right. So many people have been afraid to continue that. I want to talk about some situations that have recently been happening here in the Bay Area. I know you probably heard of the nooses that were found in Lake Merritt in Oakland. Someone says, this, as I should say, is being investigated there as a hate crime. But the guy who put them up says that this was part of a swing. This was a positive thing. This was to work out. When you hear stories like those, what comes to mind? Because when you see a rope hanging from a tree, for a lot of people, that is a threatening thing.
Well, first of all, I want to say I hadn't heard that story because there's so many stories right now that it's hard to keep up. So thank you for giving me a new racism story in my own community. I appreciate that. I actually do, because now I need to look that up. But also, I think the weak nature of the excuse, or even let's say it's not an excuse, but actually this person wasn't aware of what it looked like, is right in line with the histories and tradition of this country, where people, specifically white people, are allowed to sort of do whatever they want to do, especially around black people or people of color. And when they get caught, they're able to get out of it with a weak excuse. And that weak excuse can be, I was hanging this up for some other reason. Oops, it looks like a noose. Or that weak excuse could be like, I thought that black guy was threatening my life, so I killed him even though he was unarmed and he was running away from me.
Yeah, well, I do want to add that the person that hung those is a black man, which I think has caused some people to question maybe it was possibly part of a workout process. But right now,
I think it's an indicator also. Well, that's good to know it's a black guy. It's also an indicator of that black people's blood pressure is at an all-time high. So right now, we probably, if we walk out into the world, if we're not quarantining, one, we're afraid of COVID-19 because it targets us. And two, the world is on fire metaphorically and sometimes physically. And it's just about like, what if something happens while I'm out in the world?
All right. I want to talk about something else. It's one word. We say the first letter, and everyone knows what we're talking about.
You don't have to say the letter. I think I got it.
And I want to talk about that because, a lot of times a hit song will have the word in it, and then people say, well, you know what? I mean, they said it. I'm just singing the song. I'm not saying it to you. I'm just singing the song. What is your thought about that one?
I think we all know that all words were not created equally and that you can't use every word at every occasion. I think and that words are sort of like utensils, and some utensils are blunt and sort of you can use a butter knife for just, you can give it to a kid, and some utensils are sharper and it's a chef's knife, and you should keep that away from the kids. And I feel like the N word, which is what we're referring to, is like it's like a sharp steak knife in the hands of a child with most white people. And my thing is, you're allowed to say it, white people. Of course you can say it if you want to say it, but then deal with the consequences.
Because there will be consequences.
There will be consequences. And it may be that in your circle of friends, you may have a black friend who lets you say it, but no black person speaks for all other black people. And it may be that it's a great Dr. Dre song, classic, and you went to prom with that song. That's fantastic. But it doesn't mean that every black person who hears you say it just because you're singing that song will accept the fact that that's why you get to say it.
And you mentioned something, my friend is black. A lot of times you hear that, well, I'm not racist. My friend is black. I have a lot of black friends. Why is that a very ignorant comment to say? I was trying to think of a better way to say that, but I mean, it can sound ignorant when you are not the black friend.
Well, here's the thing. I think there's no better way to sort of talk about that as think about Bill Russell, who spent some time here in San Francisco, who was also as of course, one of the greatest NBA basketball players of all time, won 11 championships in 13 years for the Boston Celtics, was clearly the leader of those teams, coached the team to a championship, could not have been more important to the Boston Celtics winning championships when he did. And yet he will tell you about the racism of that city and how it affected him directly. So there are people who thought they loved Bill Russell and were still racist in Boston, and somehow could disconnect those two things. I mean, we all, you probably the age where you saw Do the Right Thing, right?
Yes.
It's the same thing, Do the Right Thing.
Yes.
You can Prince can be your favorite musician, and you can still be racist to black people.
And before we go, I just really want to know, like I said earlier, a lot of people, they're really wanting to have that conversation. What are the things not to say when having that conversation?
I think the big thing not to say is don't say much. Like, if you found a black person who's willing to have the conversation with you, then take a down off and just listen. Like, just, you don't need to respond to everything that black person says. You can just listen.
And you learn more when you just listen.
I've won 3 Emmys just listening. So yeah, listening is a good thing to do.
All right. W. Kamau Bell, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this conversation. I could talk to you all night, but we've got a lot more to get to. But again, thank you so much for your insight tonight.
Thank you very much.
That was a great conversation.
It was.
All right, a mounted protester, her image viral during the first set of demonstrations across the Bay Area. A black woman riding an 18,000-pound horse in the heart of Oakland. Why her horse, Dapper Dan, is so symbolic, and how he can change how we all see each other. That's next.
Welcome back. We invited you to take part in the conversation online, where we are streaming live on YouTube and Facebook, and lots of people are speaking up, posting thoughtful comments and important questions. Let's take a look here. First, we have Ashley writing in saying, I'm not violent. I'm an elementary school teacher. I am part of Black Lives Matter as an ally because no one else's child should die the way George Floyd and Breonna Taylor did. Let's turn to Bridal. Bridal tells a personal story here. I've been targeted personally, stopped by police officers, handcuffed and slammed against the car because someone gave an anonymous tip that a black man was peeping through cars. And here's a question we're seeing over and over and over again in this online discussion that's happening right now in real time. Here's what Felice asks. How do we start the conversation with people who are not open to having the conversation? What do you guys think?
Well, see, okay, so that's where an issue lies. If someone is not open to have the conversation, you can't have a conversation with someone who's not open to have it, because they're not receiving the information that you're giving. They're not willing to understand what's going on. So that makes it difficult. I don't know how to have a conversation with someone who doesn't want to, because if someone truly isn't interested in learning,
right,
they won't. Now, maybe there's going to be an event that happens within their life that may trigger them to want to learn. I think it's okay to start the conversation and to have it as much as you can. But if I don't think that you're willing to accept it, I'm definitely not going to come up to you and try to start it. You know, I don't think that my personal mission
is to go around and educate everybody.
No, I mean, I can't. I'm not a professor by education. So, you know, but when someone comes to you, if you're interested and you really want to know, I think it should start with, like W. Kamau Bell was saying, it should start with reading a book. You can look it up, like race relations. You can look up a title, a subject, and there's likely a book about it right now. Look that up, read it, and say, hey, you know, Marcus or Jessica, you know, hey, I was reading this book, and it said this, and I'm not really clear about that. So now you've already done part of the work.
Right.
So now I can just help guide you as much as I can in that explanation. So it really starts with doing some homework yourself, trying to figure out what you want to know, and then we can work collectively as a community.
It's so funny because Austin Channing Brown says that it's not her responsibility as a black woman to carry the mantle and go around educating every white person there is. And she said something that was always really interesting I wanted to ask you about. She says, sometimes most white people are more worried about being called racist than about their actions being racist. Do you think that's true?
Well, I mean, I guess that's what they worry about. But how I look at that, Jessica, I think that we all have biases. We all have privileges. There's a height privilege. There's a conventional beauty privilege. There is a white privilege. There's a female privilege. There's a male privilege. So we all have our privileges. And I think that we need to own those. And sometimes when you own it, you realize, oh my gosh, I've probably abused it in some kind of way and never knew it.
Yeah, if you really think about that, that's true. If you think about all
when
the
you
things
turn
that
the
you might
mirror
do.
and you see yourself, and you may see something you don't like, and you know what? That's okay.
Money privilege, power privilege, all those things.
We all have them, but sometimes you have to look within yourself. The white privilege, if you have it, the wealth privilege, if you have it, you have to look within yourself and say, you know what? I never realized that, you know, okay, I do hold this. Now what do I do with it? That's the question. And that's something only you can answer.
Yeah.
You know, I can't answer that for you. But you have to understand the power that you hold within yourself and how can you use that for good. You know,
that's deep.
Hey, it is what it is. And I think that we all need to take a moment just to do that self-reflection.
That mirror, that's really good. And really being able, and sometimes you can change privilege too, because like I grew up poor, but obviously that has changed. So now I have a certain level of affluence that I have to look at too and say, oh, has that changed to how I see myself? Because I've always seen myself as a poor Hispanic girl, but I'm not that poor Hispanic girl anymore.
No.
So now I've changed.
Yeah.
And now I have to reflect and see how I've changed and how that new privilege is impacting the way that I interact with other people.
You just had an aha moment.
I did.
I love that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, you know what? We want to talk about somebody else when it concerns that. He's a Silicon Valley CEO, community organizer. He sits on the board of several Bay Area nonprofits. Yet, many times, Quincy Phillips says that he's being labeled before he even opens his mouth to say a word. Quincy is joining us for this wonderful conversation. Quincy, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this narrative tonight.
Man, thank you, Marcus, for having me.
You know, okay, I want to talk about something that some people may know. If they've seen you around, they've probably noticed that you always wear purple. So talk to me about that conscious effort as to why you decided I'm going to always wear purple.
Yeah, I mean, the easiest answer to that is everyone does know that I wear purple. And when someone talks about me, when someone references me, they reference purple. You know, the guy, Q, either my first name, initial Quincy or Q, or the guy that wears purple, which is also what they're not doing is saying the black guy. You know, so for me, wearing the color purple, as much as I love, graduating from Northwestern University, for sure, I love the color itself and how it matches our hue and all of that. I love Africa, royalty, all of that comes to it. But this is my cloak. This is my cloak of invisibility that allows me to, do the work that I do. Even with you making that announcement, there's so many people that don't even know that I'm a CEO.
Right.
So that's part of this game.
And I look at that, and you mentioned you attended and graduated from Northwestern University. Talk to me about attending that school and then telling people that. Do you feel that that gives you access, allows you into certain rooms? Because when they hear that, it's like, oh, Northwestern.
Exactly. From the moment that I graduated, it was the moment that I realized that's how everyone was going to mention and reference me. I was the Northwestern graduate. I've always been, the only black person in the room, whether it's the boardroom, whether, it's doing pharmaceutical marketing or the other things that I've done. I've always been the one black dude in that room. And how I've always been introduced is, the Northwestern guy. This is our Northwestern guy. That was the thing that gave me the verified blue check, when I wasn't able to get into rooms. I mean, it's happened in Silicon Valley, right, where people didn't know me, but I found myself in some jurisdictions having to do some of the business that I've done out here, doing community and economic development. And the thing is, as much as I love the color purple in Northwestern and already being used to this life over the last 20 years, I was checked again. Who is the black guy? Mm-hmm. That's coming here to talk to us about our business. So
you've
for
even
me,
been vetted during some of those.
I've been vetted. I've been vetted sitting in a city hall office, the lobby, and sat for 20, almost 30 minutes. Where I even received text messages. I was watching my phone, emails, where there are individuals that were on the board of the organization that I was representing, as well as the executive director as well, that was letting me know that the reason, that it was taking so long for me to enter the meeting room was because they were making sure that this person, the black guy that was sitting in front of them, actually was responsible for these housing portfolios.
And Q, I want to ask you.
It's real, Marcus.
Yeah, trust me, I know. I want to talk to you, something that we've talked about before. Once you get in that room, talk to me about the importance of not only being there when you don't want to be there, but why, if you're not there, we know what might not happen.
I mean, the easiest way to answer that is that, when we look around any room, the person that's not there automatically doesn't have a voice. Right? They don't have a say. They're not able to speak. Now, the extra, amount of energy that I have to do to know that I have to show up because I know that I'm the only voice. I know that I'm the only person bringing this perspective. No matter, and it's not to speak badly about anybody else in the room, but again, I'm 42 now. I have 42 years of this experience of being in these rooms and bringing what I bring, into all of those boardrooms. So if I'm not there, and if I'm the only representative, if I'm the one black dude in Silicon Valley at that table, then obviously I'm not representing not just black people, but all of the other folks that I'm supposed to represent. Those are community members. Those are community stakeholders. They're not just black. They're brown. They're women. They're LGBTQ. There's so many folks that I'm representing. If my voice isn't there, if I'm not there, it's not going to be talked about.
Yeah, you carry that responsibility and you carry it proud. I know you do, because you have a lot of passion. Right,
yes, sir.
Quincy, I want to thank you so much for being a part of our conversation tonight. You really did provide a different perspective, I think, for a lot of people.
Appreciate it, Marcus. More to come.
That's a heavy mantle to always have to shoulder.
Yeah.
All right, so what reforms can be made and what can make a difference in the communities? We're going to talk to the director of San Francisco's Department of Police Accountability and San Jose's police chief. They will join us next.
If his death ends up changing the world for the better, and I think it will.
All Americans mourn by your side. Your loved ones will not have died in vain. We need to bring law enforcement and communities closer together, not to drive them apart.
I don't think that's enough, but I do think that is a start.
Vast majority of law enforcement officers are responsible, hardworking, heroic first responders.
This is not about a few bad apples. This is about a system of policing in our country that has gone way off the rails.
So, is the police department inherently racist? Should it be dismantled, defunded? Is there a place for reconciliation and reform? Joining me now to talk about all this is San Jose Police Chief Eddie Garcia. And first, Chief Garcia, thank you for your willingness to have this conversation. We know it's not an easy conversation, may not be a pretty conversation, but we're glad that you're here to be with us for this. Let's start locally. At the City Council meeting this week, San Jose's mayor asked for a review and possibly a change in the use of force for your department. And there was a protester at that meeting that she said she was hurt during the demonstration by rubber bullets. And she said, quote, "The SJPD does not understand the difference between real threats and regular citizens peacefully protesting." Do you think that that's an accurate or even a fair description of your department?
Well, we've been characterized in many different ways, and what I will say is, what we saw occur in this city was probably one of the most chaotic incidents that I've seen in the 30 years that I've been here. Nearly 30 years that I've been here. And I will say that, what started out as peaceful protests did devolve at certain points into violence. That's the reality that we saw on the front lines. We made mistakes. There is absolutely no question about it. I'm not proud of some things that have been depicted. But we're obviously going to learn from that and get better as we move forward. We're going to have a full after-actions report as to what occurred and things moving forward in the future that I think not just this police department, but every police department around the country, a lot of them dealt with. And so we're going to look at ourselves. We're going to hold ourselves accountable for the mistakes that we made, for the errors that we made, and we will get better. But I will tell you this, that the majority of my officers acted admirably, heroically, to keep this city safe.
So let's talk about, there's a lot of talk now about reform, things that need to change in not just your department, but in departments across the country. We're talking local, state, national issues, reform being debated, more police auditors, banning rubber bullets, tear gas, chokeholds, certifications, which means removing those so that police officers can't, with a bad record, can't go from one department to another. What are the things that you see? Let's go through them that you see police officers shouldn't be doing.
Well, obviously, we really need to work with our department. The first and foremost, and one thing that we've partnered with our unions, and especially I'm very proud of my POA stepping forward and really rooting out racist police officers, rogue police officers, individuals that shouldn't be wearing this badge. There's a saying that we have: nobody, and I mean nobody, hates a bad cop more than a good cop. We've seen how individual officers have affected and tarnished our badge. And that's a reality. So that's first and foremost, is to do what we can to the best of our ability to root those officers out, and those individuals out. I mean, we also need to look at initiatives and moving forward and what things we can do better.
Like what? What could you get rid of? The big thing is like rubber bullets. Should you have those?
Well, I think we can, on the rubber batons that we have, I think we need to narrow the scope of when we can use it. What are the things that officers have a difficult job that they have to do? We need to narrow the scope as to when police officers can use certain types of force. That certainly is something that we need to look at. This police department has worked tirelessly on de-escalation tactics that we use, and I think that's something that we must do. The other things we need to do as major police departments is be more transparent. Our community needs to know how we use force, who we use force against, and that needs to be public. I'm proud that we have a system that makes that public, that you can see. We hold ourselves transparently to say that. We should study ourselves as police departments as to who are we stopping, who are we pulling over, who are we talking to, who are we curb sitting, who are we temporary handcuffing, and put that and make that public so the community knows that we are not afraid to have these difficult conversations. There is no way that we're going to be able to move forward together unless these difficult conversations come about.
Okay, let's talk about defunding the police department, because that's a cry we're hearing all across the nation now. Your visceral reaction when you hear defunding the police department, what does that mean to you? And are there calls that you shouldn't be going on, that money should be appropriated to?
Well, let me start first on the defunding, and then we can go on to the other question. I mean, to me, the first reaction I had was my jaw dropped, really. Not only from individuals calling for that, but obviously people listening and reacting to things of that nature. Surely we do too much. Law enforcement nationally, locally, we are asked to do too much. This is not a new phenomenon. We've been talking about the fact that police officers are tasked to do so many things because it's the easiest way to get things accomplished, because we have our men and women out 24/7, and so have the police do it, have the police do it. This is not new, that we're doing too much, and we need to look at that, and we'll get to that in a minute. But when it talks to defunding in that cry that we've been seeing, I'm not a stay-in-the-office kind of chief, and I've been literally to every corner of the city. And it doesn't matter what language is spoken at a community meeting, economic status, the racial makeup of any community meeting that I have been to in my 5th year now as police chief of this city that has ever asked me for less policing. We want fair policing in San Jose, but I have never had a community group ask me for less policing. In fact, it's our communities of color that are often asking me to do more in those communities. And so to reconcile what we're hearing with regards to defunding and actually going into neighborhoods and asking the neighborhoods what they want, I have asked people to please come with me to the next community meeting that I have in some of my most vulnerable neighborhoods in San Jose, and please hear when they tell me that they want more police to keep them safe. But we want fair police, and we want to do it correctly, and that's what we're trying to accomplish here.
Let's talk a little bit about the morale of the police department right now. How do you talk to your officers with everything that's happening in the country and try to bolster them to continue to do their jobs? And I think, we've had a very powerful conversation here before about black men having to tell their children how to act in public so that they don't get pulled over. What are you saying to your children right now as well? about how people see police officers right now, and how do you tell them to think about yourself and others?
Yeah, well, let me just deal with the morale of the police department. Obviously, officers do feel, very unappreciated. I mean, I don't know if I can't mince words, that our officers do feel at times unappreciated. And so what I have to do is, and what I have gotten is, there has been an enormous pouring of support for the men and women of this department that may not be vocal, but that are telling these officers, sending emails with their support of the men and women of this police department, which I hope is happening elsewhere around the country. Just today, when I went to speak to the recruits during their final inspection, I told them exactly what I told you, is that, that when you go into the neighborhoods, you're hearing what you're hearing about defunding and what appears to be a lack of appreciation for the sacrifice that they make. But when you go to your neighborhoods, I told them that we're going to be doing this exercise, but that I have the answers to the test, because I've gone to these neighborhoods, I've spoken to these families, and they want policing in San Jose. They simply want it done fairly. We can't go to one corner and have the community go to another corner, and then no one's in the middle keeping our community safe. And those are the conversations that we need to have. And so we need to continue to do that as leaders, to tell our officers that, remember why we put this badge on. That we put this badge on to help people, to help our community. With regards to the messaging, what I tell my kids, quite frankly, and one of the things that we're doing as a police department as well, is we're instructing our also new recruits, because some youth don't understand why we're here. And there's a class that we partnered with originally with San Jose State that we teach to our recruits that covers some of the history of American law enforcement and the negative ramifications that American law enforcement has had on our communities of color, so that our young officers are going out into the field and are understanding why perceptions are the way they are, because those type of lessons aren't taught in high schools, they're not taught at academies, and we need to bring that in so that our police officers understand and truly know the root cause as to why there is a lack of distrust in police and why we need to work so much harder to gain that trust.
Thank you, Chief Garcia. We appreciate and we hope that the trust can be rebuilt. Thank you for being with us.
Hope so as well. Thank you for having me.
Now, we've been getting a lot of feedback on social media platforms. Let's bring in Chris Gamore. I know you've been monitoring that, Chris. So what are people saying?
Well, one thing that we hear over and over again is that the fact that we're having this conversation is based on these things, because so many acts of injustice are now being recorded and they really cannot be disputed. And some people are really personalizing that. Consider Joanne. She writes, she says, we see so many times when people are present and streaming it live, and I can't imagine what else I could do at that moment to stop the mistreatment. Now, here's a question, back to the conversation part. This comes from Angela. Angela asks, what is the best thing to say when someone says black people are attacked by police because they're committing crimes? How do you deal with someone like that? What do you guys think?
I look at it like this, that if someone is committing a crime, okay, police will step in to handle that. The thing isn't approaching people who are committing crimes. It's the excessive force of when committing a crime. If I took a piece of gum, do you have to throw me against the wall on the floor, choke me? Is that worth all of that? So it's not so much that we're saying that we don't think police should do their job, but we're saying the excessive force at times is really too much. And many times, I shouldn't say many times, but there are times that we see a life is gone because of that. And I don't think that black people are just always doing something bad. There isn't the numbers to show that. You think of Philando Castile in his car. What happened with that? Was he doing something wrong? No. You have Freddie Gray. Well, he said he ran. But what happened with that? You also have Botham Jean sitting in his home in Dallas, Texas, and the officer walks in. She thinks she's in the wrong, he's in her apartment. She's actually in the wrong apartment. She shoots him, she kills him. So when you see those situations, it's hard to see that question and think, well, are you not paying attention to those questions or those situations? Because it's really hard to see when that happens and people say, But there are always people who do that. It's like, well, no, let's address this. Don't talk to me about what happened yesterday with someone else. Let's address this situation. Because I think we do a lot of deflecting in this conversation sometimes. And I think we have to stay on target and address that. And then we can talk about other things.
And we will. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. And you know, from growing calls to defund police to a police reform bill working its way through Congress, well, there appears to be a focus in the country right now to have the discussion about meaningful change. But what does that change really look like? What are people really debating across the country? Right now, we want to bring in Paul Henderson. He is the director of the San Francisco Department of Police Accountability. Paul, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Paul, I want to start out with your job, police accountability. I know your job is to hold police accountable for their actions. So talk to me about what an investigation from your department, what would that look like? I know because you're independent from the police department.
We are independent from the police department, and you know, all of the studies have shown that best practices in terms of police accountability are having agencies that is involved in civilian oversight. And so my agency in particular does a number of things, including investigations. So we also do policy, we draft policy, and we also audit specific aspects of the police department and also the sheriff's department as well here in San Francisco. And so there are about 17 to 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States. But there's still just over 200 civilian oversight agencies with a varying range of approaches in terms of how they do their job. I think one of the things that works really well with civilian oversight agencies is the issue of independent investigations. Now, those are particularly important because instead of reviewing documents, information, and evidence that's been presented from the agency that you're supposed